Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our webinar. We are going to talk today about what 2024 can teach us about the cybersecurity challenges that we are all going to be facing in 2025. So we're going to talk a little bit about vuln management and some of the crazy stuff that happened in vuln management in 2024. We'll talk about the changing behavior of the threat actors that we've been seeing. We'll talk about what budgets are looking like for the new year. We'll talk about AI as a force multiplier for your attackers and what we can do with AI on the defensive side. With me, we have Jim Broome, who is president and CTO here at DirectDefense, and David Gordon, the CEO and founder at SecureConsult. I'm going to pass it off to them to do their introduction. Jim?
Hey, gang. Thanks for coming by today, and glad everybody could hop on here. If you don't know who I am, I'm Jim Broome. I'm one of the co-founders of DirectDefense. DirectDefense, we're a security services company that specializes in testing services, managed detection, as well as incident response, as well as compliance and OT SCADA. So, all the things that keep the lights on and keep us, warm at night. But more importantly, we also have a very, very mature partner program. And we get to have colleagues like David over here with SecureConsult that we work hand in hand with on several major accounts for DirectDefense and for SecureConsult. And so we're going to kind of share our experience this year. So how's it going, bud?
Great. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone. Big welcome to all of our ATEC clients and the community there who jumped on and everyone on the call today. Really appreciate your time. Nice turnout. I'm David Gordon, founder and CEO of SecureConsult. Spent about 20 years leading early stage security providers prior to doing this. McAfee, Carbon Black, Light Cyber, a few others that we won't mention. And then about 7 years ago, I had an epiphany. And I don't use the word epiphany lightly, but it actually shaped the foundation of my journey in the business. The epiphany was this. There's a persistent problem in security, and it's really an insurmountable gap between clients and providers. Pretty simple. Natural tendency, many security providers deliver their playbook of services. And if they happen to overlap with client use cases, you get a pretty good outcome. But what I've found is a lot of clients actually exit those security engagements less certain about their needs than when they started. And this was a big, big problem. So we founded SecureConsult with the singular purpose of bridging this gap. Throughout the life cycle of the relationship, we're aligning between all parties. We're ensuring that the solutions we provide meet the exact use cases of the clients. We eliminate all of the sales friction. We engage best and most senior provider resources directly with the clients, best available pricing, and we guarantee a seamless client experience. That's basically our mission. The DirectDefense team is the best in the business.
Appreciate
They have been a foundational partner of ours since our inception. Privileged to be here working with Jim today. I've known him for many years. Always look forward to kicking around ideas with him and learning his insights. I'm sure you're looking forward to that as well. With that, I'll turn it back over to Phil to guide us through today's content. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, David. That was awesome. Just some housekeeping notes. The conference or the webinar here is being recorded, and a link will be sent out if you registered, which I guess everyone who got a link is already registered. So you'll get a link to the recording, and we will take questions. There is a Q&A feature in Zoom. You can use that feature to ask your questions. We may hold your questions until the end, or if we find them particularly topical and I'm paying close enough attention, then we will get to them while we are discussing our topics. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is vulnerability management. And I just want to talk a little bit about the things that happened in vulnerability management this year, because they're kind of crazy. We went from like 27,000 CVEs in 2023, I guess last year, sorry, in 2023 to 40,000 CVEs in in 2024. That's an increase of 30 something percent. The Linux kernel team just started flagging every single bug that they fixed as a possible vulnerability and as a CVE. So they started producing about 15 per day. In general, like the massive explosion in publicly available information was not met by good, what's the word I'm looking for? Enrichment of that data. We saw the National Vulnerability Database team start to really fall behind in their enrichment duties. We saw a little bit of filling in work from CISA, but it just was a very confusing year. If you were relying on public sources of vulnerability data in 2024, you were probably struggling quite a bit. So that kind of sets the stage. And I guess the question, Jim, is what's 2025 going to look like? Is it going to be more of the same, or what are we going to do to figure out what is necessary to be fixed?
Well, ironically, the timing of that question is perfect because Microsoft just announced Patch Tuesday yesterday and blessed us with 160 plus new vulns. 8 of them
including 8 0
addressing,
days.
yeah, 8 0 days, 40 plus critical vulnerabilities to take care of. So short answer is yeah, much the same. Really, what we've seen collaboratively, especially with some of our joint customers there with David, is organizations today are really struggling as a new CISO or even a mature organization to identify where their assets are at. And when we talk about, when I put my incident responder hat on, because I do kind of run both sides of offense and defense these days, on the incident responder side of it, that's most time and time again when I'm walking in helping an organization because they had an event, it's because they didn't know where the things were. They don't know where their data is at. They don't know where their assets are. They don't know what they're trying to protect other than what they currently have, their EDR or the assets they are aware of, and they're struggling to meet those challenges. So yeah, I mean, as David can allude to, with our method to the madness of walking in and helping customers get their hands around asset visibility through vulnerability management, as well as our ongoing testing to show them the reality of what the actual risk is. That's kind of the first way we illustrate those type of things. But time and time again to kind of come back to the original question is yeah, much the same. I definitely don't see the trend slowing down at this point. So, how about you?
What do you think, David?
Well, I think it's kind of a like a building problem, meaning the more you do for people, the more you know about things, the more data you have in to rely on as you mix in proprietary algorithms and AI, you're coming up with a lot more actionable insights that get action quicker across a greater amount of people. That's sort of what we see, and especially as we add financial services companies into the services plan. All that data, while it's masked and private, it's also providing some valuable things that take a ton of time out of preventing these things from becoming bad.
Excellent. The other topic that really caught my eye in 2024 was the number of vulnerabilities we saw in edge-facing security devices, right? Your firewalls, your SSL VPNs, your other types of VPNs. And I know right now we have, what do we have? SonicWall, Fortinet, Ivanti all have critical, unauthorized access type issues that need to be patched immediately.
Actively exploited.
Exactly. Really big problems. And this is supposed to be the stuff that you were just going to put out there and it was going to protect your network. And now it's exposing your network. Do you think in 2025 the vendors of security software are going to start trying to ship secure software? Is there any accountability that we're going to see? Any trend towards improvement on that front, or is it going to be another year of send back your email devices, your email security gateways because they're completely compromised, and patch your firewalls and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, kind of directly answer that. The short answer is yeah, we have a wealth or plethora, if you will, of antiquated security products out there in the landscape today. Honestly, not to tease them too hard there, but the majority of the Citrix NetScaler platform is almost end of life, but people are still using the darn things, and those are points of entry time and time again into organizations. Ivanti apparently appears to be the new stepchild. The spinoff from Juniper, which is called Pult Secure, was the problem child of 22, 23 for having security issues. And then Fortinet, to their credit, they've gotten really good at handling the spin, if you will, when they have yet another RCE in their product. But they've been definitely having to send out quite a few of them right now. So, the bigger thing that I kind of work with clients, and again, from an incident response, I can tell you last year we had at least 6 different occasions where that was the point of entry for the threat actor. They actually broke into the VPN device. In some instances, depending on the vendor, they automatically inherited an AD cred because the device was tied to it was also the management server. So it allowed them to immediately pivot to the domain. Other times we saw that the security gateway was actually brute forcing against the domain for about a month before it was, never got caught. So again, visibility stories, you kind of have to treat the things you would trust, aka your security platforms, as a point of entry now, and make sure you've got your, the old adage, trust but verify. We're gonna have to verify the security platform is doing what we're expecting it to be doing moving forward.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would add to that, and especially as we're talking about endpoint and detection, obviously there's a ton of investment in many technologies to do this stuff. The products that are out there are doing better and better every year against, detections and zero-day threats and all those kind of things. But you still find that, just for an example, an original document can come into an organization, pass all the security checks, and it still contains malware and it still creates a problem inside.
Yep.
And that's evidenced by these breaches that come up, especially, I know of a few, in the financial services space where a data provider put infected files onto the client networks and
Yep.
caused massive problems. So all of a sudden you start thinking of these use cases like on a different level. And then the question becomes, why would you ever let an original document into an organization if the users could work on exact replicas of those documents? So, I mean, without talking any specific products, there's always a different way to talk about the problem and frame the problem to target the solution. And that's what I find the team at DirectDefense does really, really well in terms of mapping findings to preventative protection.
Teasingly, even before we got started with the call, I kind of gave you the pop quiz of what's the 2 class of users that violate your corporate, security awareness training every day because it's a function of their job: accounts payable and HR. They're required to open documents all day long from third parties.
Right.
Yep.
And I jokingly said developers, but Jim said it's mostly the other 2. So
that's my choice.
Yeah, they're doing it on purpose. Exactly.
And probably not getting caught. So there's that.
I mean, teasingly, I know numerous times when you talk to vendors like KnowBe4 and the user awareness training, it's like, what group of organizations usually fail the most? And it's like the security team, just because they're having fun.
Yeah. And we see that a lot with threat actors, right? Like great at exploiting other people, not always that great at locking down their own infrastructure. So they're always getting owned by the feds and things like that. One more question I had on the sort of security tooling side, not quite related to vuln management, but we did see a major a global IT outage, I think is the phrase people like to use this year, from a large endpoint protection solution. And then right at the end of the year, probably not as remarked upon, one of the network scanning vendors pushed out a update that broke their scanners, and people had to manually go to their consoles and run commands and fix things. Are we gonna see more self-owned, sort of self-denial of services from these software vendors, or do you think they're starting to get the idea that they need to be a little more resilient this year?
I mean, we see this across the board. So we're kind of introspectively looking at security vendors and your examples there. But if we just look in general, we've got that. We've got technology. We've got vendors that have a shelf life. If I look at the consumer, environment and that, IoT or OT technologies, they're well beyond the extended, usage model. Teasingly, or if you want to go glass half full, retrospectively, software vendor was able to take out 8.5 million devices in 15 minutes. That's pretty good for software replication. But same from where we were back in the day, with you and I going back to ISS way back in the day, we're kind of jealous. But yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be a lot of scrutiny around, platforms that are so trusted that they're at the core of a, in this case, an operating system kernel, or if they're the core of the network and, we have an outage, we still suffer these type of things from an analogy of power. I mean, how many outages have we had simply because the power supply died? That's why there's two in a chassis and those type of things. Like if we don't come up with compensating controls, not only from the vendor side, and in this case, there's a lot of finger pointing going on both those vendors.
Right.
But on the other side of just infrastructure, are we prepared to have, options to take care of that and what the resiliency was? So, I mean, the again, glass half full moment is while there was a significant outage because of, CrowdStrike, at this point and, causing the issue not even 2 weeks later, there was another major outage coming from Microsoft at the time with their bad update that required you to have the BitLocker keys. So the good news is the process, if you want to again look for the positive or the silver lining, everybody had their BitLocker keys because of the manual restoration process that required to restore from CrowdStrike. So yeah, they were far more efficient when the next outage happened.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, let's change topics. I want to talk a bit about the threat actors. I know, we're so used to the standard, everything is encrypted and all of my computers have a special pay me screen on them and things like that. And I hear that that's changing. So what is the new behavior, Jim?
Yeah, I mean that's a very true statement. Our partners over at Halcyon, as an example, do a monthly flyer of who's the latest and greatest. Actually, they kind of give a Gartner esque report on who the top threat actors are, today out there. And so the biggest change we've seen, especially in the past 6 months, you've probably seen it if you've looked at some of the postings where ransomware is a calling card. They just let you, they detonate some ransomware on probably your ES6i boxes to cause you a little bit of panic. But we've gotten pretty good as an industry for backing up and restoration. So, the shift is exfiltration. So they've highly tuned their procedures to make you talk to them. They come in, they get point of persistence inside the environment, and they immediately go to the exfiltration phase.
So that's where they're copying data out of your environment. They're
Yeah,
stealing all your
copy.
data.
Or I wouldn't say all your data. They're taking as much data that they know will require you to have to go through disclosure. So if you
Gotcha.
look at, we've been able to
Ah,
capture the PowerShell scripts they're using in many instances to go through and enumerate your shares on your local network, and they're
mhm.
keying in on financial terms. They're keying in on insurance policies, so they actually know what your payouts are from your insurance provider, so they know where they're negotiating from a seat of power. They go after your employee records, anything that would require you as an employer to have to disclose at the state or federal level. So they're optimizing their exfiltration process to really make you feel the pain. Dot dot dot. But what we've really seen is, in some instances, they've actually stopped doing the ransomware altogether. It's too troublesome, it's too slow, and this is far more efficient and faster for them to get paid. So I think the stats that have come out recently was the payment for the disruption of detonating ransomware is around 30-35% as a whole.
Mhm.
So it's down a lot, which is good. But payment because of exfiltration is as high as 80%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add a very little bit to that, it seems like they have narrowed the kill chain
Right.
to things that are only high value for
Hmm.
them. And in a way, if you have those controls, it's good for the client, and but it's still very scary on the exposure that you have on the stuff that they're not monetizing,
Right.
because at some point they will. And
Right.
I mean, what is the average dwell time of an attacker being in the network before they're able to monetize it? I mean, that's always shrinking too, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now, just for the exfiltration phase, the tentative stats I've seen from like Crow and a couple other people are under 4 hours. So,
That's not a lot of time to respond.
no, I mean, in many cases, you're still trying to get the first responders to actually answer their phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, yeah, if you don't have from the SOC side, you'll hear the concept of, time to dwell, time to respond, time to remediate inside the environment. And so those are stats we're always gleaning for as an industry to show you how quick and how great we are. But there is a real world impact to, honestly, from the
Right.
time we detected to the time we were actually able to respond and repel or stop an attack, that's becoming a reality of that's how fast the attacks are occurring. And even if I go the other way, kind of go back to your analogy on the documents there, David, like as an incident responder, many times we are hampered by the unpreparedness or the lack of maturity of the organization. They can't tell what the threat actor stole. They didn't have basic fundamental logging in place. The good news by having G Suite or Office 365 is it logs everything. We can see everything you do inside of there. But the old school legacy file storage, SANs and storage arrays, probably next to no logging whatsoever. So we are at the mercy of the threat actor to tell us what they stole. And we have, and that's where we've seen these massive payouts occurring from insurance and so forth, because we kind of have to rely on the threat actor to tell me what they actually stole and what the impact is to the organization. Or we have to take the worst case scenario, which is we know they
must have
connected to
got the crown jewels.
yeah, they got the Z server, and what's on the Z server? It's like, oh, we got 15 years of employee records, those type of things, and make that assumption. So you see the scope dramatically increase because we just don't have the visibility. And that's kind of where, technology, thankfully, there's a few partners trying to address this. Halcyon is one of them, and a couple other vendors coming out with data exfiltration protection. Or we just, old school legacy still works. DLP technology, for as much as it's a pain, data classification and DLP infrastructure from either your Office 365, your legacy on-prem vendors, they do work. They give us that visibility we need to actually have a proper risk management and risk awareness process. So, kind of going back to the old school.
It's also really interesting, as you talk about some of the legacy tools, and in order to make those effective in enforcement mode, you had to have 4 times the amount of cost against services versus what you paid for the licensing of the products back in the past. These days, I think what everybody's moving toward is, and I know we're going to talk about this a little later, but it's the AI component on the software that's doing this. And they're really, reducing and making these products so much more intuitive to actually be able to do enforcement as opposed to have to run it in learning mode for 18 months and then step up the enforcement level, and you have a 5-year project that cost you $100 million over 5 years.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's just, you need the protection now. There's no time to soak the product. You have to have it in, and I think a lot of the vendors are kind of, moving toward that model, but
yeah,
very
honestly, I'll even give credit to Microsoft. They've done an excellent job. If you actually start doing some of the basic fundamentals of just having the data classification in your tenant, as the files go by, it flags them. Doesn't actually, it's not perfect. I will be the first to tell you that, but it's something that's palatable and manageable at scale for organizations. So it's a good first whack before you get to your legacy on-prem stuff.
Let's pivot from there. I want to talk about budgets this year. Are they going up? Are they staying flat? Are they going down? What are we seeing? And how does that impact the job that our CISOs have to do to protect their organizations?
Yeah, I'll pivot to David. Teasingly, we know there's a few folks here on from the financial world on this call. So I hear budgets are going up. That's all I ever hear about. Yeah, just sarcasm. So, yeah.
Yeah, the CISOs probably would disagree with that. But the reality there is, there's an inseparable relationship from budget to acceptance of risk,
Right.
and it's sort of inversely proportional. And the CISOs, we have probably 30 that are a very tight group, and we share things pretty openly. The ones that get it are very good at articulating the acceptance of risk to the leadership of their firms. So if they're finding exposure inside the network and they're reporting that to their leadership, and their leadership is saying, yeah, well, we don't have money for that. So, they're really assigning that personal risk out. And obviously it's a nuanced discussion, and it's a new area for CISOs to have to get involved with, because they were never like politicians. They were, kind of solid technical folks in the, and now, it's becoming a much more political thing. The other thing that I noticed differences between the clients is when the CISO reports directly to finance or the CEO
Right.
versus the CISO reporting to a CIO, because what tends to happen there is a lot of the security um, priorities get lost in the
Right.
infrastructure budget.
Yep.
And when the CEO is looking at a risk or the CFO is looking at a risk, it's a very different lens. And that enables, so I mean, the coaching there is make sure people know the risk they're accepting if they're not
Yep. It's
engaging in critical security projects.
right. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's the maturity of the journey of the CISO, and more importantly, the openness for maturation within the organization itself. The most effective CISOs I've seen to date, honestly, have that really good skill of translating, you know, operational requirements and, making security an actual function of business. It's a requirement to continue doing business with each other. Doesn't matter if you're slinging pizza or you're a Fortune 100 company and you've got government contracts with multiple nations. You have to be able to translate what the initiatives of the company are, where the company's going from a business standpoint, and how to do it the most effective way possible. And if you can give them context around that on, acceptance and learning, training the board to where they're actually informed. Some great real world examples are really going into a post breach event, knowing that the CFO basically said, previously stated that because they were a publicly traded company, they could only suffer a 4-hour outage from the the accounts payable platform. And so when the CISO walked in the door, he basically had the budget that he had originally proposed for backup and restoration, and then the new budget based on the CFO's requirement for having no less than a 4-hour window. Magically, there was a significant delta on what got approved and what the reality to have and meets that requirement. So by educating the C-suite, the higher C-suite, on what the actual requirements were to do, expectation versus reality and the cost structure, some concessions were made. But secondarily, it was more of an education event to where, like, hey, had we spent this little bit over here, he wouldn't have this bigger spend over here. And it's really just trying to, kind of going back to risk management and articulating risk at a business value is really where you're going to typically get your biggest swing on your fundamental technologies. Now,
So
if we
teaching
take,
them
go
that
ahead.
like a stitch in time saves nine, right? Like if
Right.
we just did a little bit here, we
Mhm.
wouldn't have had this breach, that kind of thing. All right,
Yeah, I
back to
mean,
you. Sorry.
when I'm walking into smaller organizations, like the SMB market, and I'm working with people on their worst possible day because of IR, I'm typically talking to them both from an education but also a responder standpoint. It's like, hey, if you were to boil down every compliance and every insurance standard, there's, if you're to ask me a couple of years ago, there was only 4 mandatory technologies: firewalls, antivirus or EDR, log management slash SIM, and patch management. Nowadays, we've augmented that with identity access management or privilege access management. There's really 5 mandatory things. Everything else, you'll hear Bain Capital in the old days, you're fighting for fifth place dollars in budget because the first 4 are already allocated. And so, that kind of goes back to, all right, do I have my fundamental 4 or 5 technologies that I can always say I've met the minimum requirement that says I at least tried? And
Isn't
then
it
from
amazing
there,
how
you
many
expand on. Yeah.
organizations haven't though? That's
Right.
the thing that
Yeah.
always shocks me is you roll up and it's a mature organization, you're doing a pen test, you're like, why haven't you patched the
Yeah.
domain controllers? Why didn't you patch any of these workstations?
Yeah, I mean, well, even for those that don't know Phil very well, he spent most of his career in application security, and we've worked instant responses specifically around application. And the company has bought firewalls, they got web app firewalls, they got back-end database access monitoring, which is the best you could possibly get, but they couldn't actually tell that there was fraud going on inside the app because there was no logs within the app to see there was abuse of function at the core level. And so those type of education moments, how do you sockify your app so a human can read and see what's going on? Those are all services we had to come up with on the fly to help
Yep.
organizations respond and get that real core visibility. And that kind of comes back to, like, from the budget dwindling standpoint, yeah, there is compression going on today. I'll be the first to admit that. But at the same time, you can usually, make understand your concessions, or even teasing because I know she's on the call here. Like our marketing head of marketing here at the company, Kelly, she presents me three budgets: good, better, best, knowing that she really, and we all know she wants the better, but at the same time, that's the reality of where we need to be at. And so if you present to your board your good, better, best options that meet your minimal operational requirements for the business, then you're going to find you're usually successful in getting to your core initiatives through.
Yeah, I mean, and these are some really interesting points on the service delivery side, and
Mhm.
kind of what you're providing services, and I think that also translates into when you're evaluating solutions.
Right.
And what's happened during that process has been the proof of value has to be much more specific and actionable for them to justify for the CISOs to justify the funds. And you put in a security product, you have a 30-day trial, it works, you didn't get breached, couple findings, nothing too interesting. And based on that, you used to make a decision like, okay, I'll spend the 250 a year to get this product in a subscription. Now, what's clients are doing is really overlaying the tabletop
Yep.
experience
Mhm.
around their security budgets. So when they do a tabletop, they're really trying to emulate a breach.
Right.
And the controls that get mitigated against that breach are the things they're going to focus on to try to implement for that following year. And it's really, and I know you guys have done some great tabletops where I've learned a lot of this stuff. Um, the the process of creating a situation that's believable for every level of the organization because you have your CEO participating in a section of this. You have your CFO, you have your HR folks, you have so it goes user behavior, it's finance, it's every aspect of the organization. What happens if you get breached and why would you get breached, right? And then choosing the products and services that mitigate that risk. So the evaluation process, the proof of value process has become so much more intense on the
So you're
client side.
saying tabletops help with proof of value because it's always difficult to justify value in the security space. If we do it right, nothing happens and we haven't proven anything, right? It's so much easier to get a bunch of dollars after something horrible happens. And that's like the least desirable outcome, right?
Oh
Like what we
yeah, and
really
the
want.
whole purpose of tabletops have changed because it clearly used to be, hey, we did a tabletop and look, we're prepared for everything. Like, aren't we doing a great job? Shouldn't I get a 10% bonus next year? Um, But the reality, and there have been
Mhm.
executives, there have been CISOs, in big, big companies that have negotiated their contract in 5 minutes,
Right.
saying, well, 2018 was a great year. We didn't get breached. I'm going to need a 10% raise for 2020, whatever. Um, the whole tabletop is based on, very realistic situations
Yeah.
that could happen. There are half the group that's on these things don't know that it's a drill, so they show up for work and all of a sudden they're in breach
Alarms are
condition.
going off. Yeah, good, good. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is kind of take the outcome of a lot of those tabletops and position that against our budget discussions and planning for what we're going to do for the next 1, 2, 3 years out.
Yeah, I mean that definitely goes to our breach simulation services and even our ransomware simulation that we do for customers inside the environment. Everybody's got a plan. The old Mike Tyson adage: everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so just really testing those, and even our own tabletops. My favorite one is actually take the guy that seems to have all the answers in the room, and hey, he's got COVID. He can't be here now, and just take him
Right.
out of the room for an hour and just watch the rest of the organization struggle. Like
And
that's the
there always
reality
is
of
one guy
yeah,
that does have all the
There
answers.
is
yeah,
that Keystone
One,
guy, right?
one
yep,
Take
yep,
him
person.
out of the arch and it all falls down.
No,
yep.
no doubt, no
Yeah.
doubt.
And so just giving them a real world reality of, as close as you possibly can. I mean, there's a few people on the call that I'm aware of that, we've kind of been in the trenches together. We kind of, went through some of those where, you know, realizing they were actually talking to the threat actor. They weren't talking to the real employee because they had gotten so far in the organization that fast because of SIM swapping and other non-traditional approaches that, how the threat actor walked in, basically with global admin permissions. And so those type of real world scenarios that we do try to bring back, or at least, in a simulated environment for more of awareness and training. To your point, it was, hey, I got through a tabletop that my insurance provider gave me. I was like, yeah, that's kind of like fairyland. I appreciate the industry for offering them out there, but at the same time, there's a lot of the nuance that happens, and it's magic pixie dust. My tapes and my backups work flawlessly. Like, no, the threat actor actually logged into your
Fingers
Veeam box
crossed.
and deleted all of them. Yeah.
No.
So, when's the last time you had an offsite backup? And like, well, about a month ago. And so now, you have to go back to the business. Is a month gap in data acceptable to you guys for this, XYZ application that's mission critical? And that's the reality when we start talking about why the threat actors get paid, is something broke in the process or in the restoration procedures, or it just wasn't fully tested. And this is the chance and the time to actually take that as an advantage. And that does directly translate back to, budgets seem to get approved. We can show them the impact and reality of, expectation versus reality. So,
Well, something you mentioned, Jim, really set something off in my head, which is that you need to be able to explain and work with executives on risk acceptance. Um, and I know of some really large breaches that, like CEOs got fired and there were $100 million settlements where they had risk accepted like an out of date, software framework that was
mhm.
clearly like a remote, command execution risk. But because they didn't understand risk acceptance very well, the business was like, no, we need to keep this app up,
Yep.
and continue making this data available, and we'll just accept the risk. Like, is there a way you can just draw a line and say, no, you don't get to accept some risks, or is that something that even mature
It's
organizations struggle with?
Well, I mean, that's that balancing act between oversight and control from the government back down to a private entity. So I don't ever see that happening here in the United States. But there are frameworks being established just with the SEC filings alone, and now you have to actually articulate a material breach in your K-8 filing on a quarterly basis. That's the new reality for the larger organizations. For the smaller organizations, it comes back to just the operational tech debt. I mean, if you can just kind of explain it in those more simplistic terms of, hey, we're still using Windows 2008 R2. I've got 55,000 vulnerabilities I can't ever fix. So I really need just a couple more boxes to get these things up to a modern OS. It's making it challenging to just keep the thing running. Or, like, mine and your experience of working inside of manufacturing lines or working inside of, kiosk platforms for point of sale. How do we get to a kiosk that, okay, you can break it, but one power cycle and it's back to where it was.
Right.
It's like, how can we minimize that impact, or, minimum, those all become acceptable risk conversations. Like, I can do this and it gets us down the road another couple of years, but it's going to cost you 20 grand. Whereas replacing it right now as a CapEx expense is going to cost 65, 75,000. This is the argument we're having, but realize that I'm going to write all this down. I'm going to hand it to you, Mr. C-suite, CFO, CEO, whomever, and you're going to sign your name on
Right.
it. And yeah,
You're so
that's
convincing
been the
them.
biggest transition I've
Yeah.
seen for successful CISOs, is just turn around and like, hey, here's the list of all the things we know about. You need to go ahead and write it off because the insurance provider, not anybody else, but the insurance provider requires that you actually accepted this for an operational risk.
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Let's pivot over to talk about AI. I know it's everyone's
Mhm.
favorite topic. Last year, we're going to hear the word agent so many times this year. We're never going to want to watch another spy thriller again. Um, let's talk about it as a force multiplier for attackers. I'll give a couple of examples that I know about. We've been asked by some clients, and we meaning the penetration testing team, if we can't do some voice duplication. And the guys on my pen team are like, yeah, we'll have, half of a tenth of a second of latency. And I'm just like, that's probably just fine, actually. Like, you can have a full conversation sounding exactly like someone else. Um, as a
Yep.
sort of voice fake. I know some attackers can do video fakes. And the other thing I'm hearing about is there's a great research paper that came out actually last month that basically showed frontier AI models generate phishing emails about as good as really well trained phisher, like pen
Mhm.
testers.
Yep.
So we're definitely seeing some strides here. What are you guys seeing
Well,
in terms of attackers using AI?
well, before we answer that question, actually, I just happened to glance at the
Yeah, there's
Q&A.
actually, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Our bad actors already leveraging AI to change the attack surface. That's
And
an
really,
interesting.
that's exactly the question that you just led
Yep.
us into. And I think the reality there is absolutely the attack surface, grew exponentially just by having ChatGPT available with writing, professional emails,
Believable
which these
native
guys,
language text.
they were
Yeah,
never doing.
take everything you were trained in your user awareness training for the past 5 years and throw it out the window.
I
Because none of the typical signs are going to be
Yep.
there, right? Like
Yep.
the idea that the text will have grammar mistakes, which I was taught in security awareness
Hmm.
this year or last year, like
Yep.
it's not going to have any grammar mistakes anymore,
Yep. Grammar mistakes, localization. If they go the extra mile and hook it in and monitor what your public, profile, what you're talking about, like you've got a big contract, you're gonna have, through the phishing side of the campaign, they're definitely leveraging, chat models to actually get a more actionable campaign by having localization, nuance to your organization, like Project Viper or whatever it may be. And they've
right?
got that vernacular to get some level of authenticity in their campaign. We saw this directly in the tail end of 23, didn't come down at all in 24. I mean, it pretty much like hockey sticked and held. Just the effectiveness of phishing campaigns again, ratcheted all the way through to this holiday season where there was, as we now know publicly, there was quite a few direct attacks against, cell phone carriers
Right.
by, foreign actor.
Hmm.
And so we saw this across the board just because of relationships that our own customers have in managed services and as incident responders, that the effectiveness of human interaction and using AI models is, exponentially been impactful. Um, the other part is like the marketing team and everybody's like, what about deep fakes? The reality of deep fakes was until last year, it took hours of video to go train a model to look semi-realistic without a lot of hiccups and not to have a 30-second delay between a live Q&A type, interaction. That's gone now, courtesy of Microsoft and their project they released. While I
Yeah.
understand the importance of what they were trying to do, my bad guy, my spidey sense just kind of screamed into the ether of, oh my God, you just made this so much easier. Now they can take a few pictures, a little bit of interactive video, and a pre-recorded audio track and recreate a very, very realistic, interactive model, almost interactive model with about a, 5-second delay between the question and the response. Is it perfect? No. But is it believable by an older, generation that hasn't been properly trained against the stack? Or just, if you're out of like localization, like, you're talking to someone, maybe in India or vice versa. You've lost that, maybe there's, our voice, our UC is not working great today and there's a delay. It's believable. And so that's kind of the issue we've seen. And we've definitely seen direct attacks and mods. And I've even been, just from an IR perspective, we've had impersonation attacks against, not only public figures that we all know about, like the, Trump videos and the, president videos, those type of things, but within, customers' environments as well, where, video samples were submitted that looks like a manager or someone said something, inappropriate to another colleague and became an
Oh
HR
yeah.
event that they had to defend themselves against. So, we're definitely seeing it being used across the board. If we take the human interaction off the table, the other answer is yeah, we're definitely seeing it with exploitation. So once the threat actor gets in, they get a point of presence. How are they getting in? Honestly, we're constantly seeing the success rate of info stealers, browser plugins, and so forth, where the threat actors are actually getting all your passwords for the organization, so they get in easily. From there, once they're in, they're actually using, for those that are aware of pen test tools, Bloodhound or Sharp Hound to actually enumerate the entire domain as a normal user. And then literally just writing a couple of tools to get them through the fastest path. How is that tool doing it? AI. It's actually looking
Yep.
at what's the known exploitation, what the environment is, and actually saying you can do this, this, and this in 30 seconds or less. And so we're seeing
Yeah,
the threat
generating
actors
that
spend a
kill
little bit of
chain for
money.
you.
Yep,
Yeah.
they're more importantly their attack tree. They're generating their
Yeah.
attack tree, where they're going to go after and get to the keys of the kingdom the fastest and most
It's
effective way.
literally like just run these 10
Hmm.
commands and you
Right.
now you're domain admin.
Yep.
So it's
Yep. So
insane.
definitely seeing the bad guys use it across the board.
Yeah, that question, I wasn't sure if they were also talking about the exposure, like more and more organizations are using AI and
Yeah.
putting chatbots on the internet and things like that, and that increases your attack surface from AI. right?
Actually, even pivot back to one of your other questions, which is the data exfiltration problem. Your employees are
Right,
exfiltrating your data because you don't have a policy against such things. So number one,
right.
have a policy. What is your AI policy? What is your acceptable use policy for just putting your data anywhere? We all have that general problem of employees with a small project like, oh, I'm going to use, let's use Twilio as an example, like a project, a temporary project management thing because I like the Kanban boards
Right.
that it throws on my dashboard. This little widget now corporate data is leaking out because of this. So getting visibility is a very large technological spend. So, number one, fundamentally have a policy. Number two, find ways that you can at least get visibility. I don't know if we can enforce it because, enforcement is very expensive, but at least we can start getting that visibility story. So, having
To
some
see who's
EDR,
sending
having a
stuff to
ZTNA tool, those type of
ChatGPT.
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And just
Well,
being able to see who's using, ChatGPT.
I
Go ahead.
know there's a group of us that are working together in the ATech community on that specific problem in terms of how do you enable your organization to use AI effectively
Mhm.
without it being an unacceptable security risk, right?
Right.
And it's
Step one, stop using the free version. Go get your paid subscription.
yeah, yes, and obviously, they're locking down what
Right.
they can lock down as corporate assets,
Yep.
but there are so many back doors into every form of AI out there
Yep.
that they're already, having patterns in the open stuff
Hmm.
compared to what's happening in the corporate environment and all the stuff that gets out there into the
Yep.
uh, engine is suddenly exposed data from a
Right.
client,
I mean, yeah,
and it's
anybody that knows me
very
and
hard problem,
yeah,
very
anybody
hard.
that knows me knows I've always been a huge opponent of BYOD. It's fundamentally broken from the ground up. It's a terrible idea. And for the short-sightedness, we are spending 5 times what we ever did by not having telephones available for employees. Compound
Yeah,
this
yeah, but I
now with
mean,
the fact that it's built in.
Right.
even the BYOD
Hmm.
lockdown
Right.
doesn't prevent somebody from
Right. Yeah.
being,
A
violating the
user.
policy off
Asking
prem.
ChatGPT some
Yeah,
sensitive
Yeah.
question,
Yeah.
especially if
That's
passing it
somebody
some
who's
sensitive data.
behind on a deadline that needs to get a
mhm.
document out or needs to have a client communication done, and
Yep.
they're
Yeah, the
jumping
need
through
is
hoops.
there. I think the more reality of the situation is, yeah, you need to go ahead and get the corporate subscription that at least gives you some, control over what's being submitted
And
or,
negotiate that control and
yeah,
make sure
yeah,
that in your terms you say you don't get to use this data stays in a private, separate
right.
environment. It's
Yeah,
not used for
it's a,
training.
to your point is it has to be a corporate investment. They have to get that paid subscription. Then they have to get that paid subscription out to the endpoints. Good news is Microsoft's now made that easy, and Apple's made that easy. That it's now a, GPO setting that you can push out, so you can automatically assign your license key for your tenant into OpenAI. So you can actually leverage ChatGPT as part of your corporate subscription throughout the enterprise. So there are those type of things that we're definitely going to see, you know, challenges to. Specifically, the reason why I brought the BYOD thing is how do you actually roll out a key for everybody so you can at least on a consumer device that's being used for corporate use that now has ChatGPT integration built into it.
Right.
So, do you accept that as a risk now for the organization and go ahead and export your corporate key out to individual employee assets? That's a question and a business cost.
So we have another question, which
Hmm.
is, will AI affect the future need of various cybersecurity services? And
Yep.
I think this actually helps us pivot to the last topic, which is
Yeah.
how are we going to use AI as defenders?
Yep. 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 If I'll take the first stab on that one for you, which is
Yeah.
short answer is yes. Long answer is we're definitely seeing it across the board. The first one is really the individual technologies. You can use the EDRs. We mentioned CrowdStrike previously. They've got it in their entire suite. Just about every EDR vendor has AI and ML modeling into their
Some
platform
kind of
today.
ML system. Yeah.
Yeah. What we're really seeing the most of impactful the transformation is really around the SOC experience. That is the Q&A, the time to just normalize the amount of alerts because every vendor calls the same thing different things by a different name. So just the standardization of this alert from this tool means the same thing in this tool, and coming in cohesion of delivery of service. The interaction with the analysis on the first, we used to call it SOAR. And those again that know
Right.
me being snarky, it's SOAR. The first two generations of SOAR were automating noise, not doing anything useful.
Right.
Now they're doing things useful. And so just think about, event enrichment. I can now have a a bad hash event, a bad IP event, automatically look up anything OSINT that this, open source information, enrich that ticket. So by the time it gets to a human analyst, there's at least 5 or 6 levels of enrichment to this to where they're making a more impactful decision versus them having to go do all this time, spend this time to actually type the same things in. So yes, across the board, AI is definitely impacting the way we do analytics, the way we identify issues inside the environment from an event standpoint, and then more importantly, the way we actually respond. So we're actually starting to see AI being more intelligent to automatically generate a workflow that, with the blessing of the customer, if it's a workstation, class operating system, I'm okay with going ahead and plucking those things off the network if it's signs of hostility on the system. A production SQL server, I'm probably going to call you first.
Right.
If I can't get in touch
Or you
with it in
shut
a
it
timely
down.
manner, yeah, before I have to pull it off the network for you. But an AI can actually continually bring that back to the surface and actually, not only automate that workflow, but also, bring back to us. So.
David, what are your thoughts on AI for defense?
Well, AI for defense is an interesting one. The what I've seen in the past, and it's kind of an iteration of, predictive user behavior, things like that. Uh, it's just there's always a way in, even with AI,
Yep.
and it's just going to change. And again, everything traditional kind of goes out the window. Signatures kind of go out the window. But then it's really much more of a social engineering problem that is just, we haven't seen enough of it to, every tool is using an AI component to help them with the massive amount of tasks they have to do to be effective. But I don't have a great answer for that right now.
That's fair. We have two last questions. I don't know, you guys want to tackle them before we wrap this up? The
Yep,
first
yeah,
one
go ahead.
is we'll go quick, right? Given the oversaturation of security products coming to the market, how do organizations prioritize beyond those top 4 or 5 foundational technologies you mentioned, Jim?
Honestly, it's going to come back to need. At the end of the day, I'm the easiest. I will concede feature and widget value for manageability any day of the week.
Widget value, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, there's, again, me being snarky, I'll put that in the context. If we go back to where David and I first met at one of his first companies he mentioned back there, endpoint protection for the longest time had a ton of added, we've got USB defense, we've got, web inspection, we've got this and this, all to distract you from the fact that the antivirus part didn't work. So if we can see that feature is not always the most important thing, it's actually true value, true manageability for the organization, and true visibility.
Right.
One of the things we always harp about on the SOC side of the house, the defense side of the house, is I'm not here to make a dashboard for you. I'm here to actually give you as near real-time protection as I possibly can. As a pen tester, I
Right.
never had a dashboard stop me.
No.
And so we're trying to get as near real time and really, give that impactful side of it. So, when you need to look for your next technology, it's something that's adding real value. You're trying to actually solve a real problem and evaluate it
Yeah,
from that perspective.
and
Is what is
think
your use case and what is the visibility case you're going to get?
right. Think outside the box with what the vendor is proposing and really what your need is and where your threats are coming from. Because we just get conditioned to think, and this kind of leads into the next question that's up there,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You do that one,
What
David.
are the advantages and risks of vendor consolidation in the market, and how can orgs navigate this trend? That's a great question, and the bigger companies get, the more they tell you they can do everything, the less
Hmm.
they really can do everything. And I go back to my experience early with McAfee, where the only thing McAfee ever did well was virus scan. I don't care what you think McAfee, does as and I'll go on record as
Yeah.
saying
It
that,
scanned very well. It didn't stop anything, but it scanned it very well.
virus scanning was a great and then they started acquiring, and
Yeah.
this is the vendor
Yeah.
consolidation,
Yeah.
and then companies that weren't known for certain things started to be the quote unquote expert in other things.
Right.
They never were, though. They just had marketing slides around that, and very, very tough problem for clients.
Yeah.
And it's evidenced by when you go to RSA or you go to Black Hat and you walk the field, you walk the floor, and there's 1,000 vendors on the floor. And you just kind of go through the rows and you hear the same exact value prop from every vendor in every booth. Just you have no idea, and they're all saying the same buzzwords. Makes it just ever more important to focus internally on what the threats are, what the use cases are, and how do you help your
What that need
organization,
is.
and then use the tools to help you. But
Right.
you need your own vision around the security stack.
Yeah, and I'll just to keep it actually, within the confines of the conversation, I'll give you two examples of pro and con. As a bigger organization, you're looking for one throat to choke. So vendor management is a reality. You have to deal with, your conciseness of your vendor. So I'll use Cisco and I'll use Fortinet as the two pro and con examples. Pro, they got everything under the sun. Con, they got everything under the sun, and they don't probably have the intellectual capital that built it anymore. So one of the bigger
That's the
problems
big
we've
risk.
had across the board is vulnerability management because they don't know what their products are, their source trees are. They're having to go back and readdress the legacy issues. So it's a double-edged sword. Not every technology they acquired is going to be best of breed. They just fit into their platform. And again, snarky teasing to McAfee. We made it integrate with EPL, and we called it good. The logging platform. And we changed the logo. That was about the amount of integration to have. And so that's a problem. Is like understanding that there are limitations to going with a one silo vendor. There are pros to be had. You just kind of need to weigh those out for yourself from an organizational standpoint to see if there really, is the value you need there.
All right. That is the time that we have today. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, for your attention. And Jim and David, thank you for your participation.
Yep. Thanks, Kate.
Yep, we have recorded this. A link will be sent to your email. We very much appreciate it. So thank you again.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you. Hope you got something out of it.